Freedom is not something to fear. In fact, it's an essential component of creativity. Chaos is something to avoid. However, many creative people confuse freedom with chaos and think a chaotic environment inspires creative passion. The most creative environments are those that provide enough order and essential security that allows individuals to stretch out to create something new. As security information management has evolved with the cloud, a new form of defense has been required. Dave Frampton, the VP and GM of Cloud SIEM and Security Analytics at Sumo Logic, describes this system as living in the middle of the cloud chaos.
What you really need to do is rethink this and deliver the SIEM from the cloud, like as a cloud service itself. So it's right there in the midst of all that chaos, able to ingest all of that data. And it's savvy and smart about all those different new threat surfaces, because the service itself is built and made from all of these same components, microservices and containers and modern software that communicates by APIs.
By living in the midst of the cloud chaos, a security platform such as Sumo Logic is in the middle of the action and is creating a secure place for business and creativity to flourish. In Greek mythology, Atlas was forced to hold up the sky as punishment by Zeus. Cybersecurity forces must hold back those with ill intent, and to do so, they dwell inside the chaos and create a safe place there. They don't do this because they are condemned to this fate. Instead, they do so because they have chosen this role as protector, and this is their mission. On this episode of IT Visionaries, Dave chats about how cybersecurity has evolved to decrease silos and increase automation. He explains how humanity and ethics are required to make judgments on how AI and automation should be used to further security aims. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of IT Visionaries. And today we have the VP, GM, Cloud SIEM, that's SIEM, in Security Analytics at Sumo Logic, Dave Frampton. Dave, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
All right. We've had some of our previous guests are from Sumo Logic, but in case those that are listening have not heard from Sumo Logic or are unaware, can you please tell us what is Sumo Logic and what does it do?
Of course. So Sumo Logic provides a platform that extracts insights and intelligence from the huge amounts of data that are generated by modern business. That's at its highest level. Yeah. On top of that, more specifically, we provide specific solutions around security that we'll talk about today quite a bit, but also adjacent use cases that leverage that same platform. Maybe it's observability, application performance management, monitoring and troubleshooting, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And for your role specifically, Cloud SIEM or SIEM, as you said, in security analytics, talk a little about what you're specifically focused on.
For sure. So I lead our security business, which is kind of one part of the company in terms of putting together specific solutions for customers. And the SIEM market is probably the best descriptor for your general audience of where we compete. That's security, event, and information management for people who aren't into the acronyms there. It's basically just how a company pulls in all the data and then figures out, are there threats that are indicated by that data, and then what they should do about them. That's kind of the core problem statement that companies have that we answer with our Cloud SIEM and security analytics solution. Yeah.
By the way, I remember being in startups. This might be a little different because it's probably more mature, but as like Gartner and Forrester would start giving acronyms to industries, like we would just adopt them because we're like, is this what people are going to call us now? So we had to just do it.
The SIEM space is actually a space that we've been at the forefront with a couple of other players of sort of disrupting and reinventing. So the category's been around for a while.
Yeah.
It's kind of had this extreme makeover that Sumo has been a part of. So it's an interesting space. Most people, even people who are experts in SIEM and who have bought them and have used them for many years, have long forgotten what the letters even stand for. They just know what it is.
Yeah.
It's kind of the command. It's like the command center of your defense is the way to think about it.
So, let's talk about the evolution of this, because you hinted at something. Because I remember back in the day, we had an event logging tool when we were building software products. And it really did take someone, I would say, very, very intelligent or with a ton of domain experience to kind of even recognize there was a potential problem, because it kind of, the tools of old would just kind of just, like I said, like they would log events. It was basically a giant spreadsheet on the screen where it's like, oh, this is an anomaly. It's like, what am I supposed to do about this? Like I see a dot. I'm like literally a dot in an ocean of numbers that says it's like red. Well, I don't know what to do. And you would bring it over to our like chief engineer or chief architect, and he'd be like, oh yeah, I can ascertain that this might be this. I was like, and then I used to always think like, well, is that the problem or it's not the problem? It's like, well, I think it could be. And it was always it really felt like elementary school, kind of like guess and check style. You know what I mean? Like they're like, hey, maybe this will do it. Talk about the evolution of this industry and how it's come, because, like I said, it used to be like an ocean of numbers. Hey, maybe this is a problem. I don't know.
That's a great point. You've captured really well the genesis or the kind of founding statement of the product category, which is, wow, we have to pre-process a lot of this data and put it together in a way that a human can understand it without having a PhD, as you point out, and being able to extract insight from a giant flat spreadsheet. So the earliest SIEMs took a crack at, okay, I bring all this data in, and then I have to kind of normalize it, which just means like, how can I compare data from different vendors of the same product, or data from different clouds that fundamentally are telling me the same thing?
Yeah.
How do I figure out how to run correlations and analytics to find threats, right? And that way the person doesn't have to be a PhD. They get sort of a curated alert that says, okay, look, we've looked at all the data. You need to focus in on this particular machine, this particular user, and we think this may have happened, right? That was the beginning of the SIEM journey in the first phases. And since then, the challenge has been, how do you progressively reduce the noise in all of those alerts? There's too many of them.
Yeah.
And so you don't have time to go through them all. So that's a problem. And then there's a lot of them that are false positives. So that's a problem. And so that there's a lot of data analytics that's gone into the evolution of SIEM over the years to try to get at that problem of, how do I improve the signal to noise? And how do I narrow down to some alerts that I'm going to give a strong sense of priority to the analyst and say, these are the ones we're highly confident are going to have something nasty that you need to look at and won't be a waste of your time. So on the customer side, most people have evolved into this idea, to your point about who actually, does this for a living. They've evolved into this tiered system where they'll have a set of alerts that, are either not critical to look at or are pretty simple to look at, where there's kind of like known procedures and things to check. And they'll call that like tier one.
Yeah.
And you'll get, people kind of start out as, a former sysadmin or something like that in the old world, as a tier one analyst. As they develop skills and they learn how to investigate and figure out, well, what else might have been involved? And, did this infection spread somewhere? And, like, can I dive deep into searches to find out more and validate if it's false positive? That's sort of the tier two crew. And, you might have fewer of those than tier one. And then your PhD guy's still around. Like usually, most shops have one or two that are called tier three analysts. And these are the folks that get called in when it looks like,
yeah,
we we may have been breached here, or this is one that has stumped our entire crew, of tier two. So it's sort of, to your point on the journey, it matured over the years into that kind of, sort of order of, okay, the SIEMs, we're trying to get better every year at signal to noise, and trying to provide more automated workflow to make the work of these three tiers of analysts better. And that sort of got us to the disruptive point that, Sumo kind of entered the stage on, which was several years ago. It started to become clear that what you were defending started moving to the cloud.
Yeah.
And it started moving up the stack. You had to start defending, much more the application layer than the servers themselves, right? Those were moved to the cloud. Cloud providers protected those, and you're just now responsible for what sits on top. And what sits on top, the development of those applications oftentimes is outside the perimeter of your defense, leveraging tools to build that software that weren't in a secured environment. And many of those applications, as a part of digital transformation, are actually facing the internet, transacting business for the company. So the risk profile and the threat surface, just started to go up really dramatically and really quickly,
yeah.
Right? And compared to kind of the old world. And so Sumo's thesis was, look, you need a fundamentally different architecture to tackle that. I mean, you're not going to be able to run a little piece of software on-prem that's going to somehow keep track of all of this anarchy and chaos in the cloud, make sense of it. And you're not going to be able to home all the data back down to the ground and all of that. What you really need to do is rethink this and deliver the SIEM from the cloud, like as a cloud service itself. So it's right there in the midst of all that chaos, able to ingest all of that data. And it's savvy and smart about all those different new threat surfaces, because it itself, like the service itself, is built and made from all of these same components, microservices and containers and modular modern software that communicates by APIs. All the threat surfaces that are created by that. Our thesis was, hey, we need to deliver this from the cloud, but also for the cloud. Like, we need to understand all these threat surfaces and build analytics and content that helps people protect against these new threats, and not so much the old stuff, which had gotten pretty stale. I mean, a lot of the algorithms for detecting your on-prem infrastructure, but by about 3 or 4 years ago, you could download most of that stuff off the internet, including, the attackers could download it. So that's sort of where we come in. And we'll talk more about, this evolution of the next gen, SIEM and how the new challenges are evolving and all that. But that's probably a good place to just stop the evolution of SIEM. The current state of the SIEM market is all of the players like Sumo who have come in with these new architectures, defending the new threat surfaces with new approaches and new analytics and all that, are disrupting a lot of the legacy players that built up these architectures and businesses and installed bases of years and years and years of this on-prem, evolution into this 3-tiered analyst system and the like.
Yeah, there's a couple things that have changed. And I think before we talk to like where we are today, I think we should keep going a little bit about where things were. Because when we think about today, we think about, like, I don't know what the best to call them, but like I feel like micro teams, like they're small, like application. There's not like monolithic applications and services like you mentioned before inside of companies. There's like mini applications, like they're different dev teams are spinning up mini products that help support maybe a bigger product that helps support consumer facing product. There's a lot of little mini teams that are engineering things all the time to make improvements. At the same time, you talked about modern cloud infrastructure, and when that started coming about, how people weren't really ready for it. Obviously a lot more than I do, but I think from my knowledge on the surface, just like simply monitoring a load balancer or something like that, or elastic compute, where it's spinning up new instances of storage services, locations, right? As your application basically multiplies itself across the clouds in order to handle traffic, you would need to bring your security with you. I don't think a lot of people thought this way. Give us an idea of where it was. What was the catalyst so that we can understand what the problems were versus like what they're evolving into?
You've hit on a couple of key elements of that transition. So if you think about the old world that we described a minute ago, this is evolution. Now you have envision in your mind like the security operations center, and it's got, the SIEM's kind of the command console there, but you've got all these other tools, and you've got these analysts, and they're kind of looking at all these tools. They're trying to investigate these alerts that are being, spit out of the SIEM. And by and large, the skill set of the people that did that, you could take a sysadmin and turn them into a productive, SOC analyst in about 3 months. That was sort of typical. It provided decent motivation and talent, right? And they could more or less completely investigate, one of the alerts off the pile, with maybe only having to ask a more experienced colleague or a manager for help if they got stuck, right? So visualize that as kind of like the state of the old. And then to pick up some of the things that you just hit on, what started to change was as you started defending these cloud applications that, as you point out, oftentimes are built in these modular chunks, each of which have different teams.
Yeah.
Then what happened is the two things. One is that sysadmin started to realize, well, wait a minute, I can't interpret whether or not something is a threat or not without context, that there's no way I have myself in my head, or I can't get it from the tools in front of me. So I started having to reach out and communicate and collaborate with all those different teams that you're talking about. And in a modern piece of software, you might have hundreds of microservices that might, they might have, usually not hundreds of teams because there's a ratio there, but you might have one team responsible for only 5 or 6 of those. Right. So you end up with 20 different teams. And so this sysadmin has to start communicating with them and say, hey, this microservice was talking to an IP address outside our perimeter that was rated as medium to high risk by our threat feed. Like, is that a problem? And you might get back an answer like, no, that's not a problem at all. This microservice is it's part of the front end UI where people register for a new promotion that we just launched yesterday, right? And so the sysadmin doesn't has no way of knowing that, right? It just sitting in the cave of like the SOC. So the sysadmin has to collaborate and communicate in a much more sort of open way, as opposed to think about the old world. It's just like the vault of the SOC. They never talk to anybody. Only they look at the data. In this new world, what started to happen is that model started to sort of horizontalize a little bit. Like people started to realize, wait a minute, we need to make security much more of a collaborative virtual team effort and not concentrated in these small number of people just in the SOC looking at these alerts. And we have to start educating people in all these microservices teams, as in this example, about security. They have to invest part of their time collaborating with the people in the SOC. The person who is in the SOC, probably not the best skill set anymore to be the old sysadmin, right? You need somebody, you need a diversity of people there. Maybe you rotate in SREs, maybe you rotate in engineers who have been more involved in securing the code. You need just a more diverse set of skills and a more open sort of SOC environment. And then you need tools. And this is our belief at Sumo, and we see this on the leading edge of modern enterprise as people try to secure it. You need tools that enable people to collaborate and look at the same data, look at the same analytics, independent of whether or not their job is more focused on security or more focused on the application, more focused on IT operations. You need an environment that kind of brings those groups together across the old silos, right? And that's how I'd characterize the transition that we're in now to a different kind of modern SOC for modern enterprise, as opposed to kind of the old traditional siloed SOC for the on-prem world where the SIEM got its start.
One of the things that you kind of hinted at, and I remember because I worked, my previous experience building a startup was in a marketing software product. And I was thinking about what you were just saying, how all these microservices have different use cases. So it's not really clear, a central command doesn't even no idea how the data is supposed to behave. So how would they ever recognize an anomaly or an error? And I was thinking about when, so we were a social media monitoring company and we did, brand engagements, but things would go viral. When something goes viral, the data spike would be preposterous. The amount of load of that was in our systems of data coming in.
Exactly.
And I was thinking myself, I remember back in those days, because we only had one central authority that's how we did it, and we would have to go back to our CTO every single time. He would be freaking out and running around, what's the problem? This problem, when this was evolving in different microservices, different teams, different parts of the application, they see different data loads. What was coming first? Was the demand coming from the customer side where it was hey, we need something to help us alert at the team level? Or was this something that Sumo Logic or maybe your team prior where you were, I know you were a co-founder of another startup that got acquired by Sumo Logic. Did you start seeing this and say no, I'm predicting that if we build this kind of solution, this is what people are going to want because this is how teams are going to go?
Oh, for sure. There was deliberate foresight in the founders of Sumo. I mean, the background of the founding team was from ArcSight, which happened to be kind of the category creator of SIEM to begin with, right? So they knew this problem, really well. And they saw pretty early that fundamentally you would need an architecture that had a property called elastic scale.
Yeah.
And, for people in the audience who may not be as familiar with kind of that terminology, it just means that you have to be able to accommodate real-time massive increases in data ingestion that you might come from the situation just as you're describing a minute ago, right? And you have to do that without having to pre-provision a bunch of capacity that you pay for, but you most of the time don't get any value out of in that kind of old static way. Or worse yet, in the middle of a security incident, you're having to call a partner or who then calls a vendor with a ticket that says, go provision more capacity, right? I mean, you don't have time for any of that, right? Because every second counts in these type things. So their original founding vision is, hey, let's build this architecture in the cloud that'll have this elastic scale property. So we don't, Sumo doesn't, force its customers to say how much data they're going to send us. I mean, we just accommodate whatever they send us. Now, yes, over long periods of time, there are commercials around, hey, if you send us, more data writ large, then you're going to end up having a larger contract. But none of that is on a day-to-day basis. Like real time, the system literally scales to the capacity of the cloud. And so it can handle all of these massive kind of viral spikes and all of that. I would say on the custom, so there's foresight there on the supply side. On the demand side, as customers started migrating to the cloud, it wasn't all this complicated at all, really. It was, oh my God. Like I'm even the very beginnings of lift and shift. I don't have visibility. Like, I need to start collecting, logs and metrics and other sources of signal from this new environment that's different from my old one, and start ingesting that. And it just started to make sense. Well, why don't I start collecting that, in the cloud, as opposed to like having to home it all down to on-prem, to mix it with my legacy system. So but there was definitely, that's years later. I mean, that's like 5-6 years later were we at that stage. But the founders in the first years, they had this vision that, the elastic scale of the cloud was going to be essential for modern security. And there was just no other way to do it. And that's why it was going to be hard for the legacy SIEM players to go from their old on-prem architectures. They'd almost have to kind of junk the whole thing, or build new, or fake it, like where they sort of take the on-prem and then they cloud wash it, but it's really just the old on-prem with the same provisioning boundary and all that. So
they take all the data from the cloud, dump it into the on-prem system, and send it back out.
There are all sorts of jokes and metaphors about that. They're good.
With this complexity that was started to evolve in the engineering teams, or I guess it wasn't complexity, it was more like opportunity. The opportunity of cloud allowed people to build smaller teams, I feel like, to then take advantage of different services as they needed. I know I gave an example. Here's another example I have. One of my friends works at their research company. He said like it was a simple thing, building a microservice to use TensorFlow to send the articles out that they're like their educational articles out, get them tagged up to identify what the subjects are, so they improve searchability. But like that little transition was just a microservice they built for their own greater application that allowed professors to search, right? And so that's like a prime example of a tiny little thing moving tons of data, but only 1 or 2 engineers were responsible for it. Now you kind of hinted at this new thing, which was the tier 1, 2, 3 support by application, by service, potentially by group. And that notifications. So like that's what I want to talk about next is like, on one hand, you're now identifying these things, right? And you kind of hinted at it. It got more complex as to, well, who's in charge, right? And like there was a new rise of companies that just are all around like almost like service ticket SIEM routing. Like, hey, we built a company just to handle the rules engine of where this alert needs to go.
Yep.
And now it seems like that. So that splintered off a new industry, but now it seems like this industry is going to consolidate again, where the event managers are like, wait a second, we can route the ticket. That's not a problem.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, back to that notion of building a common platform, so that instead of having, siloed tools that only connect in some sort of like overreaching ticket system, but people are still working in these different siloed tools that don't talk to each other. Why not, and this is our thesis is look, let's build like a Sumo Logic platform that the application team can use for, its observability and its monitoring and troubleshooting and its APM and all of that. But the security team can use the same data lake and the same analytics, the same visibility, and do the SIEM use case. And that way, when the two groups have to, collaborate together, like you're saying, they're sort of speaking a common language, and there's common workflows, and there's efficiency of this. So we do think that there's a consolidation, to your point of like, it's kind of coming back together. There is a consolidation, and that ticketing part of it, you're probably familiar, as many of your audiences, with, the difference between kind of the surface ticketing and case management, and then the orchestration and automation underneath that. I mean, those are two kind of different things. You can use many kind of ticketing systems that'll keep track of the case and what's the state of the case and who's assigned and all of that. But the orchestration and automation underneath that, that's much more related to the specific workflow of how can we make the analysts more efficient once they take an alert off the pile?
Yeah.
How do we automate manual task, and then automate the collection of other information that maybe before we'd have to go run searches in 9 tools. Now we can run a script. Let's keep a playbook of previous learning so we don't, have to reinvent the wheel. And then let's figure out, okay, if we want to take some action, maybe we can pre-wire some automation so that as soon as a decision is made, to remediate something, we can just press a button and then, we'll quarantine a user or shut down a machine or isolate a part of the network, whatever, it might be. And that's, we just acquired at Sumo, what's called a SOAR company, a security orchestration, automation, and response company, DF Labs, last quarter. And that's another big trend in the SIEM space is, since a lot of this involves automating workflow, you want to have your SIEM and your SOAR work very, very closely together, because there's kind of a handoff. The SIEM detects and then starts the investigation, and then the SOAR sort of picks it up for the more, difficult ones as it goes. So that's another, dynamic here is how do we bring automation into play and in a much larger scale way to make this stuff more efficient.
So we had another guest on IT Visionaries from the networking space talk about how network engineering is going down the route of trying to create some automation so that if like a network, like a router goes down, that it automatically reroutes this other way, that they have like a troubleshooting service that could, do some type of service on the router without any human intervention, and potentially like send it a new address or bump its subnet or whatever needed to happen. I mean, it seemed very like, and when he was explaining, it was like super futuristic, because typically for anyone who's ever been in an office that the internet goes down, it turns into like, no one knows what to do. Everyone freezes, right? And you start looking for the guy that can fix that. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The whole company's like, I don't know what
totally.
to do. Even like the senior engineer,
I don't know what to do. In larger enterprises, and this might surprise some in the audience, but in the old days, it was really hard to do that kind of automation, because you had to write these custom scripts that took into account all the different nuances of the things that were connected to each other, and like which version were they, and all of that. In modern IT, it's much easier with a lot of the software being API driven to actually, on a technical level, stitch together a set of actions and tasks to automate something. But what's not as easy is the people and process part of that automation, because oftentimes this automation might span several, organizational boundaries, right? You can't just decide inside of the security group in an enterprise that you're going to shut down some servers in the line of business engineering team. Yeah. Because, there's a, head of engineering and a general manager and all of that over there who are on the hook for deadlines. Maybe they're launching a new service tomorrow, maybe many things, right? It actually requires and this is kind of more of the current kind of state of, innovation and challenge for customers is, how do we help get that people and process stuff right? The tech is actually getting to the point where you can pretty efficiently, set up a lot of these automation workflows and even take humans out of the loop. But do you want to take humans out of the loop? And who has to agree that you take those humans out of the loop? And who needs to approve ahead of time? Who needs to approve if there's a checkpoint in the middle? This is something many companies don't really think through. They just jump in with the tech and, now great, we have this automation capability. And then they quickly realize, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah. Yeah. Who makes the judgment call, right? Like you're hinted at right there. Like a simple thing could be like, let's go back to those viral spikes or traffic spikes. Every company sees them. Every retail company, for example, during Black Friday has an operational spike. Just happens, right? So let's say you notice an outflow of data that was abnormally high and it was disrupted. Well, should it patch it or should it stop it? You know what I mean? Like that a simple question is that, like automation. And then you're right. Like each scenario would require probably some level of human judgment to be like, well, in this scenario, we would stop it. We would not repatch it. Right. In this scenario, if it's, it's financials, we automatically want to stop it. Okay. What if it's your credit card processor demanding more? Because they're processing so many credit cards, like, oh, well, we got to keep that on. It's like, well, what is it? You know what I mean? Your question of if we could, it's not a matter of if we could, it's a matter of if we should. I don't see how that changes. Yeah.
You've hit on something there that is, as I look out, sort of in the next, 5 or 10 years, it seems in automation and maybe a parallel track in machine learning and AI, we're kind of in this great kind of middle period where you can envision 10 years from now, and maybe it's 5 years for the Bulls and 10 years for the Bears, who knows, right? But no one forecasts that well. But you can envision that a great majority of the activities of the security operations will be handled in a completely automated way. You'll have, detections that are gleaned from the data with no human guidance or hints, right? No old rules engine, right? Just as the new, just like AI and ML just studying the data while you sleep, right? And they'll identify the threat, and then there'll be a whole set of, automations that deal with most threats, not all, but most threats, without a large amount of human involvement, right? The tech is just not there yet in either AI or automation to execute that today, but we know we're on that journey. Like we know that we're going to get there. So the question is, in both of these areas, what's the right way to be in both of those fields? What's the right way to be pragmatic and realistic about what the current state of the tech is good for, but when its use can be dangerous or create, unpredictable consequences, right? This is part of what's exciting about, working in security right now, because it's on the one hand, we have this promise that we're all working towards, where we really feel like we can get, with a couple of other techniques that we can talk about in a minute, we can really catch up a little bit with the advantages that the attackers have, right? But we're not there yet. But we want to sort of learn along the way and leverage this tech as it matures and evolves at each step on the way from here to there. And when to involve the human, and which humans to involve, and how long should we wait for a human, intervention? These are exactly the kinds of questions that we think about in our design teams, like thinking about the workflows that we're designing the products for, to get at exactly these use cases that you're bringing up.
Yeah, and then of course this is bound to happen, because when I think of what a Sumo Logic product is designed for, like you mentioned a modern enterprise, or I guess you don't even have to be enterprise to still use a ton of intermingled technology, right? Even small companies now today are doing that.
Totally.
Literally at each point, whatever you want to call it, failure point, data flow, every time data flows from object A, or, between A and B, there can be potentially a security problem, right? And the amount of judgment calls that are in, it really is, like you said, it's at the microservice level. I think we're pretty far off, I think, from an AI being able to figure out, like, at every step of the way, this is how I'm going to fix this.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably going to be utilized more first in probably some universal truth type situations. Like I used an example of airline rebooking. I think most of us agree that we all universally would prefer an option that gets us home sooner, right? like that AI can work in your favor, because very rarely when a flight is canceled does someone want to wait longer. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. There is the odd cases of dysfunctional domestic relationships and loneliness, but other than those odd cases, yes, we can all agree that you want to get home sooner.
Yeah. I think AI will be quick to do that, but what you guys are in the business of, I don't know when AI is able to then make the judgment call. I think I agree with you. I think I would be bearish, I guess, on that. I think AI will get there, but I think people don't want to lose that center of control a little bit. It's scary to think that your security decisions are going to be made by a machine. But my head's on the chop. Like this, if this AI fails, I'm fired, or my business falls.
Yeah. I mean, there's sort of a fear and greed, tension, like in a lot of things. And on the one hand, the fear, if you take them one at a time, if you take AI, and most people use ML AI as sort of interchangeable, and we could probably burn 5 minutes of the podcast. We shouldn't do trying to splice the two. But in that area, the fear that people have is that, look, this, I want to understand why this concluded what it did. I want it to be a transparent algorithm. And also I want to make sure that if it did identify something and I say, wow, you were right, then I want to make sure that every time after that, it flags that same thing and doesn't get too smart for its own good and decide, well, no, there was some other subtle difference. So, this same thing, which was the burglar, in a ski mask at the front door, I alerted on it once, but I didn't alert on it the second time because, the person was the same height as my neighbor or something, right? You want to make sure that you kind of understand kind of the reasoning and you get a repeatability out of it. And then in the automation one, it's just the fear. The fears are, well, one, it's just a intuitive loss of control, but two is what happens if somebody hijacks that automation thing?
Yeah.
Then I've kind of like, really created a monster, type thing. So that's the fear end of it. But the greed part of it is looking at the impossibility of human workflows keeping up with the volume of data and the volume of alerts that are created. It's just not, it's gotten so far away from us, and the cloud and digital transformation have just accelerated that trend, to exponential scales. So you have to realize, like, yes, there are those fears about leveraging those two technologies, but the flip side of it is most of these enterprises in a traditional type of defense, they realize they're only getting to less than 10% of the alerts that are thrown by these systems.
Wow.
And so it's almost like, look, we're going to have to sort of, start migrating to the future here and leverage technology to help us scale. Otherwise, we're sort of kidding ourselves that we're actually defending, and we're just kind of reduced to like this herd defense where, you just, hope that you're in the middle of the herd and not picked off the edge type of thing. And I think people recognize that. And that's why I think people are willing to tackle these daunting challenges. So, I mean, think about what we've talked about. Hey, we have to open up the SOC. We have to make it horizontal. We have to get new skill sets. We have to have collaboration, across boundaries with people that are unfamiliar with each other and with the technology and all that. I mean, nobody needs all that challenge dumped on their desk, but you have to realize that the fundamental mandate of security is you have to keep a coherent defense, despite all those challenges. And that's why people are both cheerleaders and skeptics and cynics. Maybe I said three things, not two, but you know what I mean? Like about AI, ML, and about automation, it's almost like everybody has a love-hate type of thing, with them.
Well, I think when you have deep, intimate knowledge of the problem, as you have, it's just really hard to conceive that something can just solve all of it. Do you know what I mean? Like for example, like if you were to tell a writer that AI can write a story, they wouldn't believe you. This too hard for them to conceive of it. It's like, I've seen too many writers spend, decades at their craft, still write a story that sucks. You know what I mean? Like when you have so much intimate knowledge of something, I think we become inherently a skeptic of it because we just see all the problems. We can't see all the solutions.
Yeah.
And when you're on the developers, or when you're developing the solution, you can romanticize the outcome because you're like, you don't see all the problems. Like you only see the benefits. Right. And it's like you said, it's somewhere in the middle. But when I hear you and what you're up to at Sumo Logic, I know this thing. I do know you're going to be busy. You're going to be busy for a long time, man. I don't think you could.
You nailed it. This is not a field for those who want to sort of coast along, on the fruits of previous generations. Cybersecurity is on kind of the cutting edge of really just modernizing the economy into a digitally transformed, new economy, and the inevitable, momentum behind that just forces security to play catch up and do everything possible to get ahead of it to achieve the mission.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at your track record, right, you've served as a VP of multiple different companies. Cisco, a big company. You had your own startup, Factor Chain, and gets acquired, and you're probably, like, I would love for you to answer this. How much did you think you had solved at Factor Chain at the time of acquisition versus how much do you think you have solved right now?
Oh my gosh. Startups in general are, they're focused usually, not all the time, but usually, especially in the security space, they're focused on, taking a piece of the problem that is a critical link that needs to be improved and figuring out kind of the quantum leap for how to do that piece of the problem 10x better than it was done before. Like that's, so at Factor Chain, our piece of this puzzle was this tier 2 analyst would often spend, an hour or two, trying to answer this question, what happened? Where did this spread? What should we do about it? And we thought, hey, some of this is related to an underlying problem and making intuitive connections in large data sets. And so we invented some tech, and I won't geek out on you, but we invented some tech to to help people do that was different than the way that, it was done before. It showed, super promising, results and all of that. But we realized at some point in our journey that, look, I mean, it's great that we've improved this one thing like 10x, and we've got customers who are, starting to buy it and all of that. But we also realized like we'd be, yet another security vendor, and, we'd be carving out budget, borrowing it from, bigger systems. If our goal is to get this innovation in the hands of, the most number of people, we're probably going to be better off as a smaller part of something bigger.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because, the security industry goes through these waves of like best of breed point products and then consolidated products. We've seen this over the decades. We've been in a consolidation phase now for about 5 years, where you see all the startups kind of get absorbed by bigger companies because the complexity is just too great for the end customer to integrate all these different products together. Yeah. Right. And so to answer your question, the short version is, my goodness, I mean, the problems that we're tackling now across the whole of the full stack SIEM space, the SOAR space, the security analytics space. I mean, it's a 100x the breadth of what we were doing as the startup, but that doesn't mean that there isn't the role for the startup. I mean, we've acquired 3 companies, right? Not just mine, but 2 others. And like ours, they had pieces of the puzzle, but not all of it. Right. So a lot of what I do at Sumo is like, look, we need to think of this innovation as not only what our engineers can do, but what the startup community can do. And then we can sort of assimilate, the innovation from outside of Sumo and just continue to build, the more complete solution for our customers, leveraging kind of the best of both.
Yeah, no doubt about it. There's just too many opportunities of improvement. I would say that's the best way to probably phrase it, right? Like there's someone that's focusing on one thing that probably can do it very, very well. It makes total sense bringing it into everybody. Dave, I want to thank you for joining us today on IT Visionaries, sharing some of your experiences from startup to what you're doing now at Sumo Logic. But before you leave, it is time for the lightning round. The lightning round is brought to you by our sponsor, the Salesforce platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Dave, this is where we ask you questions outside of the world of work so our audience can get to know you a little better. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So for our audience who cannot, they're not going to be able to see this, but I can see that your profile picture on Zoom is actually you climbing up a frozen waterfall. So you are a thrill seeker. How did you get into that?
I'm an ice climber and a mountaineer for sure. I don't know if I can make thrill seeker, as you and I were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. Thrill seeking involves some other activities that seem crazy to me. So, but I love to climb.
You climbing up a frozen waterfall, man. That is not safe. That's thrill seeking. If you're doing something that's not safe, that's thrill seeking.
Yeah, fair enough. All a matter of perspective. How did I get into it? Is the question. So, a friend of mine in the neighborhood, we were in a workout group together. Was into this and just took me on a trip to Colorado, and it was a pretty controlled deal. It's a canyon you go into, and you start out kind of just kind of learning to use the ice picks in each hand, and then your crampons have the spikes that stick into the ice and all of that. And the very first time I did it, I just realized that there's a perspective on nature that you can get when you climb, particularly like climbing in a waterfall that's really inaccessible in any other way other than to actually climb it and be in it, right? You can look at that picture on my Zoom and you can see the waterfall and everything. And it looks very sort of smooth, and there's some bumps, and you imagine what that might look like. When you're in it, staring at it like 2 inches away from it, you see an entire world of crystalline, fractal beauty that you couldn't appreciate when you looked at it, from far away. Now, I've just found that about climbing in general. We were on the North Palisade this past weekend, and you see the same thing in the walls of granite that are slowly disintegrating as water gets into the cracks and expands every winter. They sort of peel off and fall down into the valley. So it's disintegrating over 100 million years, and you're there just at a snapshot in time, looking at all of that fractal complexity. It's a beautiful thing, and it's very hard to experience from a picture. You kind of have to be there. So that's how I got hooked on ice climbing, and that's now expanded into other parts of it. But
well, listen, I'm an avid surfer. I know exactly what you're talking about. because you can see a video and watch someone get barreled, and you can be inside of a barrel. There's two completely different things, right? Someone like, oh, you're just in a tunnel of water. Like, what's the big deal? It's like, nah, it's not just a tunnel of water. I try to explain it, but as you probably have done with other people that don't do, like, I guess, nature events, is like they can't put themselves there. Like, why would that be more impressive? I don't know, but I'm very impressed. This is awesome. So what kind of music do you like listening to? Because we're trying to gauge your personality. You're an ice climber. What kind of music you like?
Oh, that's just tough. Why did you have to add that question on? So this is I'm just classic rock is, I know doesn't add any color or excitement to the triangulation between security and ice climbing and mountaineering. But I suppose I should have said, like, thrash metal or something. It would have like fit more into the stereotype. But no, classic rock is where I sit. If you stole my phone and looked at it, that's what you would see in about 80% of it.
If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Oh, my superpower would be, I'll give you the truthful answer. I was going to try to give something inspiring about empathy, but A, that would be too cheesy. And B, the truth is I'm like, I'm not a spring chicken, right? I'm like a guy who's like working out 6 days a week to try to fight age.
Yeah.
And I'm just hella sore from 3 days on a brutal climb. And I would just get a handle on this aging thing. And I would just sort of go back 10 years, freeze there, and just keep the body that I had 10 years ago, like, for the rest of my life. That would be my superpower.
There you go. You want to be like Wolverine. Wolverine can self-heal. You know what I mean?
That's right. Man, my knees and hips right now could use like a double heap of self-heal.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Well, Dave, it was awesome having you on the show. Thanks for sharing a little insight into your personality and some of your hobbies. I think what you're working on at Sumo, the industry itself it sounds crazy when we always talk about it, but like every person we talk to on the show is really in their nascency, right? But you guys are, as far as Sumo Logic is coming, you're still there, right? Like there's so much to do, like some of the things we talked about with AI and automation. So like I said, I know you'll be busy. So stay young, keep up 6 days a week. I know you're sore on the knees and stuff in your back, but hey man, keep after it.
Albert, thanks so much. Great to be here. Great to get to know you.